There is a very specific, suffocating silence that falls over a room when someone signs their own death warrant. That was the silence drowning the VIP lounge. Harper stood there, a cheap waitress tray, clutched in her raw, overworked hands, having just looked the deadliest man in the city dead in the eye and called him exactly what he was. Pathetic. She expected the flash of a gun. She expected the dark. What she didn't expect was for him to smile, step forward, and completely rewrite her existence. The clock behind the bar read 3:14 a.m. Harper felt every single minute of her 14-hour shift localized entirely in her lower back and the arches of her feet. This was the Obsidian, a high-stakes underground club where the city's elite came to launder their morals. Harper hated the club. She hated the men in their tailored suits who thought $100 tip bought them the right to touch her waist. But mostly, she hated that she needed them. Rent was due in 3 days. The final eviction notice was a crumpled yellow threat in her coat pocket, and her mother's pharmacy bills were piling up on the kitchen counter like a paper monument to their misery. She was wiping down a table in the corner of the VIP lounge, her movements mechanical, her mind blessedly blank. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. The ambient noise, the clinking of crystal, the low murmur of negotiations, the soft jazz piped in through hidden speakers evaporated. Vincent Rossi had arrived. Harper didn't look up immediately. She didn't need to. She could feel the atmospheric pressure in the room drop. The men who had been puffing their chests and boasting about their offshore accounts suddenly shrank their eyes, dropping to their polished Oxfords. Vincent didn't demand attention. He absorbed it, a black hole in a charcoal 3-piece suit. He walked with a quiet, lethal grace, flanked by 2 men who looked less like bodyguards and more like industrial farm equipment in trench coats. Vincent's face was a study in sharp angles and exhaustion. He didn't have the exaggerated swagger of a movie gangster. He just looked relentlessly, bone-wearyingly bored. He took his seat at the head of the leather booth in the center of the room. Someone snapped their fingers. 2 goons dragged a man into the center of the floor. Harper froze, her damp rag hovering over the polished mahogany table. She knew the man on the floor. It was Leo, one of the older dishwashers from the kitchen. He was trembling so violently, his knees knocked audibly against the hardwood. His nose was bleeding a steady drip of crimson, staining the lapel of his faded uniform. "Mr. Rossi, please," Leo sobbed. The sound was high, thin, scraping against the absolute silence of the room. "I just needed a few more days. The track the horse tripped, I swear to God, it was a sure thing." Vincent didn't say anything. He slowly reached into his jacket, retrieved a silver cigarette case, and tapped a cigarette against the lid. He placed it between his lips. A lighter was instantly produced by a sycophant to his left. The flame flared, illuminating Vincent's dark, hollowed eyes. $3,000, Leo, Vincent said. His voice was a low rumble devoid of anger. That was what made it terrifying. It was entirely transactional. "You took $3,000 from the lockbox in my kitchen to bet on an animal. I was going to put it back with interest." Leo wept, pressing his forehead against the floorboards. Vincent exhaled a plume of blue smoke. "You're a thief and a liar, but worse than that, you're an embarrassment." Vincent leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Lick it." Leo looked up, terror pulling his face into a grotesque mask. What?" Vincent pointed a long, calloused finger at a puddle of bourbon someone had spilled near Leo's knees. "Lick it up. Maybe I'll let you keep your hands." The men in the room chuckled. It was a nervous, ugly sound. Men laughing because they were terrified, men laughing because they were grateful it wasn't them on the floor. Harper's chest tightened. She felt a familiar hot pressure rising in her throat. She looked at Leo, a pathetic, broken old man, who occasionally saved her half a sandwich from the kitchen when she couldn't afford a lunch break. Then she looked at Vincent. She saw the absolute lack of emotion in his eyes, the casual cruelty, the audience of cowards feeding his ego. Her feet hurt, her back ached. She was so incredibly, unfathomably tired of living in a world where men like Vincent got to play God over people who were just trying to survive. The filter between her brain and her mouth, worn thin by exhaustion and poverty, simply snapped. The heavy glass ashtray slipped from her tray. It hit the floor with a sharp, resonant crack that shattered the silence. Every head turned toward her. Vincent's gaze slid lazily from Leo to the waitress standing by the corner table. His dark eyes locked onto hers. There was a warning in that look, a cold, heavy promise. Harper didn't look away. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her face felt entirely numb. She stepped over the shattered glass. "Are you done?" Her voice rang out, shockingly steady. One of the massive bodyguards started toward her, but Vincent raised a single finger. The guard halted instantly. "Excuse me," Vincent asked, tilting his head. "I asked if you were done," Harper said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the hollow, cynical weight of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "He owes you money. Break his fingers. Fire him. Kill him. Do whatever it is you people do." She took a step closer, ignoring the collective gasp from the room. "But making a desperate old man lick liquor off a dirty floor while your little fan club laughs," Harper sneered, her eyes raking over the men in the booths before snapping back to Vincent. "You don't look powerful. You look pathetic." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a physical weight. It pressed against the walls. A few men subtly shifted their chairs away from her, as if stupidity were contagious and lethal. Harper stood her ground. Her hands were trembling now, so she balled them into tight fists at her sides, digging her nails into her palms until the skin broke. She was going to die. The realization washed over her cold and absolute. She was going to be dragged into an alley and shot because she was too tired to keep her mouth shut. Vincent stared at her. He didn't blink. He took a slow drag from his cigarette, the cherry burning bright red, casting demonic shadows across his sharp cheekbones. The smoke curled from his lips as he exhaled. He crushed the cigarette out in an ashtray. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up. He was taller than she realized. Standing at full height, Vincent eclipsed the ambient light of the room. He walked toward her, his footsteps making no sound on the hardwood floor. Harper forced her chin up. If she was going down, she refused to cower like Leo. She met his gaze, cataloguing the details of her executioner. There was a faint silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His eyes weren't just dark. They were the color of deep, frozen water. He stopped inches from her. She could smell peppermint expensive tobacco and the distinct metallic scent of gunpowder clinging to his clothes. "Pathetic." Vincent repeated the word rolling off his tongue as if he were tasting a foreign spice. "You heard me," Harper whispered. Her vocal cords refused to produce anything louder. Vincent looked her up and down. He took in the cheap, scuffed shoes, the runs in her stockings, the dark circles under her eyes, and the defiant, reckless fire burning in her pupils. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his cold facade. Not anger, not pride, curiosity. He turned his head slightly toward the massive guard on his right. "Oliver, take her upstairs. My office." Harper's stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss. Upstairs. Upstairs was where people went when they were going to be disappeared. Oliver stepped forward, his massive hand wrapping around Harper's upper arm. His grip was like a steel vice. "Wait," Harper choked out, looking back at the floor. "What about Leo?" Vincent paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "Leo," he asked, genuinely perplexed by her priority. He glanced at the weeping man on the floor. "Throw him out," Vincent told his men. "If I see him in my city again, feed him to the river." It wasn't mercy, but it wasn't a bullet. Harper allowed Oliver to pull her away. She was marched through the silent lounge, feeling the eyes of 50 men burning into her back, watching a dead woman walking. The office upstairs was a stark contrast to the gaudy velvet and gold of the club. It was minimalist austere and suffocatingly quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the rain-slicked streets of the city. A massive mahogany desk sat in the center, devoid of paperwork. Oliver shoved her inside and pulled the heavy door shut behind him. The lock clicked. Harper stood alone in the center of the room. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the lounge suddenly abandoned her, leaving her hollowed out and shaking. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself on the edge of a leather armchair. She pressed her face into her hands. "What did you do? What did you just do?" She thought of her mother alone in their drafty apartment, waiting for a morning cup of tea that Harper would never make. A dry sob racked her chest. She wasn't a hero. She was a 24-year-old high school dropout with $50 to her name. She had thrown her life away for a man who stole money to bet on horses. The doorknob turned. Harper flinched, instinctively stepping backward until her spine hit the cold glass of the window. Vincent entered alone. He had taken off his jacket, rolling the sleeves of his crisp white shirt up to his forearms, revealing skin corded with muscle and inked with faint, dark tattoos. He didn't look at her immediately. He walked to a crystal decanter on a side table and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass. He picked it up, turned, and leaned against the edge of his desk, studying her. "Drink," he offered, holding the glass out. Harper stared at it. "Is it poisoned?" A sharp, barking laugh escaped Vincent's chest. It startled her so badly she jumped. The sound was rough, as if he hadn't used it in years. "If I wanted you dead, sweetheart, you'd be a red stain on the floor downstairs," he said, taking a sip from the glass himself to prove his point. "I don't waste good scotch on corpses." He set the glass down and crossed his arms over his chest. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a terrifying clinical focus. "You called me pathetic." "I did." Harper lifted her chin. "Why?" Harper blinked. "I think the reasoning was self-explanatory." "Explain it anyway," Vincent demanded softly. "People in my world do not speak to me that way. They beg, they barter, they lie. They don't insult my pride in front of 30 capos and lieutenants." Harper looked at him, truly looked at him. Strip away the money and the men with guns and what was left. A man drowning in a life he clearly despised, compensating with cruelty. "Because a real monster wouldn't need an audience," Harper said, her voice dropping into a quiet, raw honesty. "Real power doesn't need to put its boot on the neck of a terrified old man to prove it exists. You didn't do that to punish him. You did it to remind the room that you could. It was a performance. And it was cheap." Vincent's jaw tightened, the muscle feathered in his cheek. Harper braced herself for the backhand for the weapon to be drawn. Instead, Vincent looked away, staring out the window into the driving rain. "For 5 years," Vincent murmured almost to himself, "I have been surrounded by sycophants. Men who kiss my rings while holding knives behind their backs. Women who look at me and see nothing but a vault with a heartbeat. I breathe and they applaud." He turned his gaze back to her. It was heavy, laden with a sudden suffocating intensity. "And here comes a waitress in scuffed shoes, dragging her feet through the mud of my club to look me in the eye and call me a fraud." He took a slow step toward her. "What's your name?" "Harper." "Harper," he repeated, He stopped just a foot away. The heat radiating off his body was palpable. "Are you not afraid of me, Harper?" "I am terrified of you," she admitted, her voice trembling just slightly. "But I'm more exhausted than I am afraid. You want to kill me? Fine. It'll save me the trouble of figuring out how to pay my rent on Tuesday." Vincent stared at her, dissecting her words, searching her face for the lie. When he found none, the corner of his mouth quirked upward in a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Tuesday, huh?" he said softly. He turned around, walked to his desk and picked up a sleek black phone. He dialed a short extension. "Oliver," Vincent said into the receiver. "Bring me the personnel file on the waitress. Harper." "Yes, now." The silence returned, but the texture of it had changed. It was no longer the silence of an impending execution. It was the tense, coiled quiet of a predator circling something it didn't quite understand. Harper stayed pinned against the glass. "What are you doing?" Vincent ignored her, remaining seated behind his desk. 2 minutes later, a soft knock came at the door. Oliver entered, handed Vincent a manila folder, and vanished just as quickly. Vincent flipped the folder open. He skimmed the contents, the only sound in the room, the rustling of cheap paper. Harper felt intensely violated. That folder held her pathetic existence, her meager wages, her home address, her emergency contacts. Harper Davis. Vincent read aloud, his voice stripped of emotion. 24. No criminal record. Mother Susan Davis suffers from early onset Parkinson's. You work double shifts here and a diner across town. You are currently 3 months behind on rent. "Stop!" Harper snapped, stepping forward, the embarrassment momentarily eclipsing her fear. "That's none of your business." Vincent snapped the folder shut and dropped it onto the desk. "It is my business when an employee causes a scene that undermines my authority. I was trying to figure out if you were sent by the Rossi family or the Colombos to test me." He leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "But you're not. You're just a girl drowning in debt who pushed too hard against a wall that usually pushes back. So fire me," Harper said, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the sudden chill in the room. "Oh, I'm absolutely firing you from the floor," Vincent said smoothly. He stood up, picked up his glass of scotch, and walked around the desk until he was leaning against the front of it, just inches from her again. "But you are not leaving this building." Harper's breath hitched. "What?" "I have a problem, Harper," Vincent said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "My father died 6 months ago. He left me a kingdom built on rot. Half of the men downstairs are plotting to put a bullet in the back of my head, and the other half are waiting to see who succeeds so they can kiss the new ring." He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "I need someone in my corner who isn't infected by this life. Someone who doesn't care about the politics. Someone who will look at me when I am making a mistake and tell me I am being pathetic." Harper shook her head, thoroughly bewildered. "I don't understand." "I am offering you a job," Vincent stated flatly. "As what, your court jester?" "As my fiancé." The word hung in the air, heavy and absurd. Harper let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. "You're insane." "I am pragmatic," Vincent corrected, his voice hardening, pulling her back to the reality of who he was. "The syndicate operates on tradition. A boss without a wife, without an heir, is viewed as unstable, a temporary placeholder. My rivals are trying to arrange a marriage for me with the Colombo family to secure a truce. If I refuse, it's a declaration of war. If I accept, I sleep with a knife to my throat for the rest of my life." He reached out his long fingers, gently catching her chin, tilting her face up. His touch was warm, rough, and sent a dangerous electric shock straight down her spine. "But," Vincent continued softly. If I am already engaged to an outsider, a tragic whirlwind romance that I refuse to abandon it buys me time. It breaks their trap without forcing my hand. And what happens to me? Harper whispered, unable to pull away from his grip. When they find out I'm a fake, when they decide to use me to get to you, they won't get to you. You will be shadowed by my best men. You will live in my home. Vincent's thumb brushed lightly against her lower lip. It was an intimate gesture that contrasted violently with the cold calculation in his eyes. In exchange, your debts vanish tonight. Your mother moves to a private care facility with the best doctors on the East Coast by tomorrow morning. You will never serve a drink wipe at table or look at a price tag ever again. Harper stared up at him. Her mind was spinning. He was offering her heaven, but the gates were guarded by devils. "Why me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You could hire an actress, a model. An actress would try to please me. A model would be terrified of me," Vincent said, dropping his hand from her chin. "You looked at a man who could have you butchered, and you told him the truth. I can't buy that kind of loyalty, but I can buy your debts." He turned back to his desk, pulling a sleek, matte black pen from his pocket and sliding a blank piece of expensive stationery toward her. "Write down the amount you owe. All of it." Harper didn't move. "Vincent." She started surprising herself by using his first name. He looked up, his eyes sharpening. "If I do this," Harper swallowed hard, "I'm not going to be a quiet little doll you parade around. If I see you acting like a monster, I will tell you." For the first time that night, a genuine smile touched Vincent's lips. It transformed his face, stripping away the exhaustion and revealing something devastatingly handsome beneath the shadows. "I'm counting on it, Harper," he said. She walked to the desk. Her hand shook as she took the pen. She wrote down a number that had kept her awake weeping at 4 a.m. for the last 2 years. $45,000. Vincent glanced at the paper. He didn't blink. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. "Oliver," Vincent said. "Boss. The Davis account, clear it. Have the estate manager wire 50 grand to the mother's medical fund and prep the guest suite at the compound." Vincent paused, his dark eyes locking onto Harper's wide, stunned gaze. "My fiancé is moving in tonight." He hung up. Just like that, with a 30-second phone call, the suffocating weight that had crushed Harper her entire adult life simply ceased to exist. Vincent walked over to a closet, pulled out a heavy cashmere coat, and held it open for her. "Your shift is over, Harper," he said softly. "Let's go home." Morning at the Rossi estate did not break. It intruded. Harper woke to a suffocating silence. For the past 5 years, her mornings had consisted of the rattle of the subway, the agonizing drip of a leaky kitchen faucet, and her mother's strained breathing from the next room. Here there was nothing, just the heavy, muffled quiet of a room insulated by wealth. She sat up. The sheets pooled around her waist, a thread count so high it felt like water. She looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were still raw, the cut on her palm from the shattered ashtray the night before, a sharp, stinging reminder that she hadn't just hallucinated the last 8 hours. She swung her legs over the edge of the mattress. The plush carpet swallowed her bare feet. The guest suite was the size of her entire apartment, decorated in muted greys and slate. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a high-end holding cell. A polite, singular knock sounded at the heavy mahogany door. Before Harper could speak, the door opened. A woman in her 60s stepped inside, carrying a silver tray. She wore a tailored black dress and an expression carved from granite. "Good morning, Miss Davis. I am Clara. I manage the household." Clara set the tray down on a small glass table near the window. Steam curled from a porcelain coffee pot. Beside it sat a plate of pastries and a folded newspaper. "You don't have to serve me," Harper said instinctively, her voice raspy. She pulled the thick duvet up to her chest, acutely aware of the oversized borrowed t-shirt she was wearing. "I can make my own coffee." Clara paused, her hands neatly folding in front of her. Mr. Rossi's instructions were clear. "You are a guest of honor. If you make your own coffee, I am failing at my job." "I prefer not to fail." It wasn't a threat, but it carried the weight of one. "Right," Harper muttered. "Thank you." Your mother's transfer to the Sterling Ridge facility was completed at 6 a.m. Clara added her tone, shifting not to warmth, but to a slightly softer neutrality. "Dr. Aris is personally overseeing her intake. He is the best neurologist in the state. She is comfortable." Harper's breath hitched. The defensive wall she had thrown up the night before fractured. She pressed a hand to her mouth, squeezing her eyes shut as a hot, ugly tear spilled over her lashes. For 2 years she had watched her mother fade into a shadow, drowning in the terror of a broken healthcare system. In a single night, a criminal had done what a dozen charity applications could not. "Thank you," Harper choked out. It was barely a whisper. "Do not thank me," Clara said. "Drink your coffee. Mr. Rossi expects you in the conservatory in 20 minutes. Oliver is outside your door. You are not to wander the grounds alone." Clara left the door clicking shut with terrifying finality. 20 minutes later, Harper walked down the sprawling, marble-floored hallway, flanked by Oliver, the massive bodyguard from the club. He moved like a shadow, silent and imposing. The conservatory was a glass-walled room at the back of the house, overlooking acres of manicured lawn that sloped down to a high iron-wrought perimeter wall. The sky was overcast, casting a pale, flat light over the estate. Vincent was sitting at a wrought-iron table reading a ledger. He wore dark slacks and a charcoal sweater pushed up at the forearms. In the daylight, he looked less like the devil and more like a man carrying a physical crushing weight on his shoulders. The exhaustion in his eyes was stark. He didn't look up as she approached. "Sit." Harper pulled out a chair opposite him. The metal scraped loudly against the stone floor. Vincent finally raised his eyes. He scanned her face, lingering for a fraction of a second on the redness of her eyes. He didn't comment on it. "Tonight we dine with Carmine Rossi, my uncle, and Dominic Colombo," Vincent said, closing the ledger. "It is supposed to be a peace summit, a negotiation over territory by the docks. In reality, it is a wake. They are coming to see if the corpse of my father's empire is cold enough to carve up." Harper gripped the edge of the table. "And where do I fit into this? Dominic was planning to offer his sister's hand to me tonight. An alliance." Vincent leaned back, lacing his fingers together over his stomach. "When I introduce you, he will be insulted. Carmine will be furious. They will push you. They will try to find the cracks in the story. They will try to prove you are a whore I hired for the night to insult them." "I was a waitress," Harper corrected sharply. "Not a whore. To them there is no difference," Vincent replied, his voice entirely devoid of judgment, just stating a brutal fact. "You are not of their blood. You are a civilian, a stray." "Then why do this?" Harper asked, her frustration rising. "If they're just going to hate me, how does this help you?" Vincent leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The sudden proximity made Harper's pulse jump, because they understand a power grab. "They understand a strategic marriage," Vincent said softly. "What they do not understand is a man making an irrational choice out of obsession. If they believe I am genuinely, recklessly attached to you, They will consider me unpredictable. Men like Dominic fear the unpredictable. He reached across the table. His hand hovered over hers for a second before his long fingers closed around her wrist. His touch was warm an anchor in the freezing room. You called me pathetic yesterday because I needed an audience to feel powerful, Vincent murmured. Tonight you are my audience, Harper. Watch me, and do not blink when they look at you. Harper had never worn a dress that cost more than her car. It was a deep, midnight blue silk slip dress that clung to her curves and fell gracefully to her ankles. Clara had provided it, along with a pair of stiletto heels and a diamond choker that felt heavier than a shackle around her throat. Looking in the mirror, Harper didn't recognize the woman staring back. The exhaustion was hidden beneath expertly applied makeup, her hair swept up into an elegant twist. She looked wealthy. She looked untouchable. She felt like a fraud about to step onto a minefield. Vincent met her at the bottom of the grand staircase. When he looked up, his footsteps halted. For a long-stretched moment, the icy detachment in his gaze fractured. He looked at her not as a strategic asset, but as a woman. The air between them pulled taut humming with a sudden unscripted tension. He recovered quickly, clearing his throat and offering his arm. "You clean up well, Miss Davis." "Don't get used to it," Harper muttered, taking his arm. The wool of his suit jacket was rough against her bare skin. "My feet are already screaming." Vincent's mouth twitched in the closest thing to a smile she had seen all day. "Endure it. For tonight." The dinner was held in the estate's formal dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a long mahogany table and a crystal chandelier that dripped like frozen rain. Carmine Rossi was already seated. He was a barrel-chested man with thinning hair and eyes like dull coins. Beside him sat Dominic Colombo. Dominic was young, perhaps 30, with slicked-back dark hair, a sharp jawline, and a smile that looked like it belonged on a predator, deciding which artery to sever. The conversation stopped dead when Vincent entered with Harper on his arm. Carmine's face purpled instantly. Dominic's smile slipped, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "Vincent!" Carmine barked, his voice echoing in the large room. "What is the meaning of this? This is a family table." "She is family uncle," Vincent said, smoothly pulling a chair out for Harper. He pressed a hand to the small of her back as she sat. The warmth of his palm seeped through the thin silk, a silent command to hold her ground. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce my fiancée. Harper." Dominic let out a low, mocking whistle. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass. "A fiancée? Well, this is a sudden development. I don't recall seeing her at the regatta last month, or the charity gala. Tell me, Harper, which family do you belong to?" Harper looked at Dominic. She felt the sudden urge to shrink, to look down at her lap. This man killed people for a living. He was looking at her like she was a stain on the carpet, but then she remembered Leo on the floor of the club. She remembered the eviction notice. She remembered that she had already stared down the devil and lived. Harper met Dominic's gaze and did not blink. "I belong to myself," Harper said, her voice steady and loud enough to cut through the tension. "And as of last night, I belong to Vincent." Dominic chuckled, but it sounded hollow. "A civilian." "Vincent, you bring a civilian to a sit-down." "My sister was prepared to merge our operations. She brings 3 ports and 50 men. What does this girl bring you?" "She brings me peace." Vincent lied effortlessly, taking his seat at the head of the table. "And she is not up for discussion, Dominic. We are here to talk about the docks." "I think she is very much up for discussion," Carmine sneered, leaning heavily onto the table. "You disgrace your father's memory. A waitress, I ran a background check the moment Oliver pulled her file. Vincent, don't think I don't have eyes in your house. She was pouring cheap whiskey 12 hours ago. She's a gold digger, paying off her mother's hospital bills. Vincent went perfectly terrifyingly still. The temperature in the room plummeted. Harper saw his hand twitch toward the inside of his jacket. Before Vincent could draw a weapon and start a war, Harper spoke. "You're right," Harper said. All three men turned to her. Vincent's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing a silent warning. "I was pouring cheap whiskey." Harper continued leaning forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany table in a gross violation of high society etiquette. She looked dead into Carmine's eyes. "I worked 14-hour shifts to keep a roof over my head. I know exactly what $1 is worth, Carmine." "Do you?" Carmine blinked, momentarily derailed by her absolute lack of shame. Harper shifted her gaze to Dominic. "You want to talk about what I bring to the table? I bring reality. You people sit in these mansions drinking $1,000 wine, playing chess with lives you've never had to live. Vincent chose me because he's sick of looking at people like you. People who smile in his face and wait for him to turn his back so they can plant a knife in it." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the same suffocating silence from the club, but this time Harper wasn't afraid. She was furious. "I might be a waitress," Harper said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "but I'm the only person in this room who isn't lying to him." Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Slowly the predator's smile returned, but this time it was laced with genuine respect. "Well," Dominic murmured, raising his wine glass toward Vincent. "She certainly has teeth, I'll give you that, Rossi." Vincent didn't touch his glass. He was looking at Harper. The exhaustion was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dark, burning intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. He wasn't just acting anymore. "The docks, Dominic," Vincent said, his voice a low, lethal rumble. "Or you can leave." The dinner ended 2 hours later in a tense, fragile truce. The docks remained under Rossi control, but the air was poisoned with unresolved hatred. When Carmine and Dominic's vehicles finally rolled out of the estate gates, Harper felt the adrenaline drain from her body in a single sickening rush. She leaned against the cold stone pillar of the front portico, kicking off the stiletto heels. She didn't care that Oliver was watching from the shadows. Vincent stood a few feet away, watching the taillights disappear into the foggy night. He loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar. "You stepped out of line," Vincent said. His back was to her. "I saved you from shooting your own uncle at the dinner table." Harper shot back, rubbing her aching arches. "You're welcome." Vincent turned around. The porch light caught the sharp angles of his face. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping so close that Harper was forced to tilt her head back to look at him. "You made yourself a target," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Carmine hates you now. Dominic is intrigued by you. Both of those things are lethal. I was already a target the second I agreed to this," Harper said, holding her ground, refusing to be intimidated by his size. "You told me to tell the truth. That's what I did." Vincent stared down at her. His chest rose and fell with a heavy, uneven rhythm. Slowly he reached out. His hand brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against the sensitive skin of her neck, his thumb finding the frantic racing pulse at her throat. "You are entirely too reckless to survive in my world, Harper Davis," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. Harper's breath hitched. The air between them turned heavy, charged with a magnetic, terrifying pull. She knew she should step back. He was a monster. He was a killer. But the way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Before either of them could move, the world exploded. The sound came first, a high, sharp crack that ripped through the quiet night, followed instantly by the deafening shatter of the portico's massive decorative urn directly behind Harper. Stone shrapnel sprayed into the air. Harper didn't even have time to scream. Vincent tackled her. He didn't grab her. He threw his entire body weight against hers, taking them both hard to the stone pavement. The impact knocked the wind out of her lungs in a violent rush. "Get down!" Oliver roared from the driveway, his weapon already drawn, firing blindly into the tree line beyond the gates. Crack! Crack! Bullets sparked against the stone pillars. The sound was deafening, a brutal, chaotic assault on the senses. Harper curled into a ball, squeezing her eyes shut, a high-pitched ringing filling her ears. She felt Vincent's heavy, solid weight, covering her, completely shielding her from the onslaught. "Stay down. Do not move." Vincent snarled directly into her ear. His voice was ragged. More shouts erupted from the compound. Floodlights blazed to life, turning the front yard into a blindingly bright stage. Automatic gunfire echoed as Vincent's guards returned fire toward the road. Tires screeched in the distance, rubber burning against asphalt as the shooters fled into the night. Then, abrupt, ringing silence. "Boss, they're gone," Oliver yelled, running up the steps, his boots crunching over shattered stone. "A black SUV. 2 shooters." Vincent didn't answer immediately. He stayed draped over Harper for another agonizing 5 seconds, ensuring the threat was truly over. Then slowly, he pushed himself up onto his knees. He grabbed Harper by the shoulders, hauling her upright. His eyes were wide, frantic, scanning her face and body. "Are you hit, Harper? Look at me. Are you hit?" "No," she gasped, her hands shaking violently as she patted herself down. "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." She looked up at him. The breath died in her throat. Vincent's white dress shirt was torn at the shoulder, and a steady stream of dark crimson blood was soaking into the fabric trailing down his bicep. "You're bleeding." Harper choked out her hands, hovering over his arm, terrified to touch it. Vincent glanced down at the wound. It was a graze, brutal and deep, tearing through the muscle. He didn't even flinch. He looked back up at Harper, his expression hardening into something cold and absolutely terrifying. It was the look of a man who had just decided to go to war. "Oliver Vincent," said, his voice flat, devoid of the frantic energy from a moment before. "Yeah, boss. Lock down the compound. No one gets in or out." Vincent stood up, pulling Harper with him. His grip on her arm was tight, unyielding. He pulled her toward the heavy oak doors of the house. "Who was it?" Harper asked, her voice trembling as the reality of the violence set in. "Was it Carmine Dominic?" "It doesn't matter," Vincent said, kicking the front door open. The opulent foyer felt different now. It didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a bunker. He stopped in the center of the hall and finally let go of her arm. He looked at her, standing in her ruined silk dress, barefoot, shivering uncontrollably from the adrenaline crash. "I promised you safety," Vincent said quietly. The blood was dripping from his fingertips onto the pristine marble floor, a stark, violent contrast. "They just broke that promise." "Vincent, you need a doctor," Harper said, stepping toward him, the fear momentarily eclipsed by the sight of his blood. He caught her hand with his uninjured arm, stopping her. His dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the layers of strategy and cold command. "They shot at my house. They shot at you." His thumb brushed over her knuckles, right over the small cut she had given herself the night before at the club. "This is no longer a performance, Harper. I am going to burn their entire world to the ground." The estate's underground medical bay smelled sterile, a sharp chemical bite of rubbing alcohol and iodine that burned the back of Harper's throat. It was a room that shouldn't exist in a private residence. Stainless steel tables, a surgical light overhead, and locked cabinets filled with trauma supplies. It told a silent, brutal story about the reality of Vincent's life. Harper stood near the door, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. She still wore the ruined silk dress. The hem was stained with dirt and a few drops of Vincent's blood. Vincent sat on the edge of an examination table. He had stripped off his ruined shirt, his bare chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. An older man, Dr. Evans Oliver had called him, was threading a curved needle with black suture. "You don't need to watch this," Vincent said. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the tiled wall opposite him. "I'm fine," Harper lied. Her voice shook, betraying the tight knot of nausea in her stomach. "You're in shock." "I said I'm fine." Vincent finally turned his head. The exhaustion in his face had deepened, hollowing out his cheeks and darkening the bruised skin beneath his eyes. He opened his mouth to order her out, but the doctor stepped forward. "Hold still, boss," Dr. Evans murmured. He didn't offer a local anesthetic. Vincent didn't ask for one. The needle pierced the torn muscle of Vincent's shoulder. Harper watched her breath catching. Vincent didn't flinch. He didn't make a sound. The only indication that he felt anything at all was the sudden sharp clenching of his jaw and the way the tendons in his neck pulled taut like piano wire. It was agonizingly intimate to watch a man endure pain with such absolute silence. Harper realized with a sudden pang of clarity that he was used to it. He was used to bleeding alone. "Done," Dr. Evans said 15 minutes later, snipping the thread. He taped a heavy gauze bandage over the wound. "Keep it dry. I'll leave the antibiotics with Oliver. If you spike a fever, you call me. Don't play tough." "Thank you, Doc," Vincent muttered, sliding off the table. He grabbed a fresh black t-shirt someone had left on a chair and pulled it over his head, wincing slightly as the fabric dragged over the fresh stitches. The doctor packed his bag and slipped out the door without another word to Harper. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the unsaid. Vincent walked over to a metal sink in the corner and turned on the cold water. He splashed his face, gripping the edges of the basin so hard his knuckles turned white. Harper walked slowly across the room. She stopped a few feet behind him. "Why didn't you flinch?" she asked quietly. Vincent turned off the tap. Water dripped from his chin. He leaned his head forward, resting it against the cool mirror above the sink. "If I flinch, they know I can be hurt," he said, his voice rough. "The doctor say." "Anyone?" Vincent turned around, leaning back against the sink. He looked at her, his eyes stripping away the bravado of the Mafia Boss, leaving only the man beneath. "In my world, pain is a vulnerability. You show it, and someone will use it to break you." Harper stepped closer. She didn't know what possessed her, but she reached out. Her fingers were trembling. She stopped an inch from his chest, hesitating. Vincent didn't move away. He watched her hand, completely still. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating a steady, heavy rhythm against her skin. "I'm not them," Harper whispered. Vincent looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to spike. He lifted his uninjured arm and covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm harder against his chest. His skin was burning. "I know," Vincent breathed. For a second, the world outside the bunker vanished. There was no Carmine, no Dominic, no gunfire in the dark. There was just the smell of iodine, the cold fluorescent lights, and the desperate, tethering warmth of his hand over hers. Then heavy boots pounded down the hallway. Vincent dropped her hand instantly. His face shuttered the iron walls, slamming back into place. Oliver appeared in the doorway. "Boss, we have a location on the SUV. It was dumped in the river near the south docks." Vincent's eyes darkened, the brief flash of humanity, buried beneath a sudden, absolute violence. Who owns the South Docks? Carmine, Oliver said grimly. Vincent nodded once. He walked past Harper, the air turning frigid in his wake. Get the men ready. We're going to pay my uncle a visit. The estate transformed over the next 48 hours. It ceased to be a home and became a fortress. Dozens of men in dark suits flooded the grounds carrying assault rifles in plain view. The heavy iron gates at the entrance were padlocked and reinforced with armored SUVs. The quiet hum of wealth was replaced by the frantic, metallic click of magazines being loaded and the constant static chatter of encrypted radios. Harper was confined to the upper floors. It wasn't a request. It was a mandate. Vincent had positioned 2 guards outside her door and ordered Clara not to let her out of sight. Vincent himself had vanished. He left before dawn on the first day and hadn't returned. By the evening of the second day, the claustrophobia was suffocating. Harper paced the length of her massive suite until her feet ached. She wore comfortable jeans and a sweater Clara had procured, but she felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She walked to the window, pulling the heavy velvet curtain back just enough to look at the driveway below. It was raining again, a cold, relentless downpour that turned the estate into a grayscale photograph. The door opened behind her. Harper turned, expecting Clara with another untouched tray of food. Instead, it was Oliver. He looked haggard, his clothes smelling of damp wool and exhaust fumes. He held a sleek black cell phone in his massive hand. "Miss Davis," Oliver said, his voice unusually strained. "Call for you." Harper frowned. "Who is it? Is it my mother's hospital?" Panic flared in her chest. "No." Oliver held the phone out. His eyes were hard. "It's Carmine Rossi." Harper froze. "Why is he calling me?" "Because he can't reach Vincent," Oliver replied. "Vincent cut the lines to Carmine's compound. We have him boxed in. He's desperate." Harper stared at the phone. It looked like a live grenade. "I have nothing to say to him." "Take it," Oliver urged quietly. "Keep him talking. We need to confirm he's actually inside the compound and hasn't slipped out a tunnel. 3 minutes, that's all the trace needs." Harper swallowed hard. She took the phone and pressed it to her ear. "Hello." "Harper." Carmine's voice sounded entirely different from the arrogant bark at the dinner table. It was reedy thin, laced with a panic he was trying desperately to hide. "You're a hard woman to reach." "You shot at me," Harper said, her voice dropping into a cold, flat register she didn't know she possessed. "I was aiming for Vincent. You were just collateral damage." Carmine shot back. "Listen to me, girl. Vincent is a dead man walking. He thinks he has me cornered, but he doesn't know what's coming. Dominic Colombo is moving his men to flank Vincent's right now. It's over." Harper's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles ached. She looked at Oliver, shaking her head slightly, communicating the threat. Oliver's eyes widened, and he tapped an earpiece, instantly whispering rapid commands into his radio. "Why are you telling me this?" Harper asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Because you're not one of us. You're a stray he picked up." Carmine wheezed. "You want to survive the night, walk out the back gate. I have a car waiting 2 miles down the road. I will wire $2 million to any account you want. Take your sick mother and disappear. You stay, you burn with him." $2 million. It was a number so large it didn't even sound real. It was freedom. It was absolute, guaranteed safety for the rest of her life. Harper looked around the luxurious cage she was trapped in. She thought about her old apartment, the leaky faucet, the suffocating terror of poverty. She had every reason to walk away. She owed Vincent nothing. He had bought her debts, yes, but he had also dragged her into a firing squad. Then she thought of the raw, bleeding man sitting on the examination table, holding his pain in absolute silence. She thought of his hand, covering hers, the frantic heartbeat beneath her palm. "You don't understand anything, Carmine," Harper said softly. "What? You think Vincent needs a performance to be powerful? You think he needs an audience?" Harper's voice hardened into steel. "He doesn't. He's coming for you. And when he finds you, I hope it hurts." She ended the call. She handed the phone back to Oliver. His face was unreadable for a moment, before a slow, grim smile broke across his scarred features. Trace confirmed. "We have him," Oliver said. He pocketed the phone. "I'll radio the boss about Columbo's flank. You did good, Harper." "Just tell him to come back," Harper said, her voice finally breaking. Oliver nodded once. "Lock the door behind me." He left. Harper locked the door, sliding the heavy deadbolt into place. She walked back to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. Out in the dark, the war was raging, and for the first time in her life, she realized she had chosen a side. Dawn broke in a bruised palette of purple and grey. Harper had fallen asleep in the velvet armchair by the window, her knees pulled to her chest. She woke with a violent start at the sound of heavy engines roaring up the driveway. She scrambled out of the chair, throwing the curtains open. 3 black SUVs tore through the gates, their tires kicking up mud and gravel. The vehicles looked battered. One had a shattered windshield. Another was missing a side mirror. They slammed to a halt in front of the portico. Men poured out. Some were limping. Some were carrying others. Harper didn't wait. She unlocked her door, ignored the startled shouts of the guards in the hallway, and sprinted for the stairs. She practically flew down the marble steps, her bare feet slapping against the stone. She hit the foyer just as the massive front doors were pushed open. Vincent walked in. He stopped dead in the center of the entrance hall. He looked like he had walked through hell. His dark suit was ruined, covered in plaster dust mud, and stark rust-colored stains that Harper knew instantly were blood. His face was a mask of absolute terrifying exhaustion. His knuckles were bruised, the skin split open. He looked up and saw her standing at the bottom of the stairs. The air in the house seemed to stall. The chaos of the men behind him faded to a distant hum. Vincent stared at her, his chest heaving, his dark eyes entirely hollow. He wasn't the polished mafia boss anymore. He was a killer, stripped down to his most violent elemental parts. Harper felt a primal spike of fear. This was the monster. This was the man who had ordered executions, who had bathed in the blood of his own family to keep a throne built on rot. She took a step toward him. Vincent flinched. It was a minuscule movement, but she saw it. He took a half-step backward, raising a hand as if to ward her off. "Don't!" Vincent rasped. His voice sounded like it had been dragged through broken glass. "Don't come near me, Harper." She stopped. "What happened?" "Carmine is dead," Vincent said flatly. The words held no triumph, only a sick, heavy finality. "Dominic backed down when he realized we broke the flank. The syndicate is mine. It's over." He reached inside his ruined jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. He tossed it onto the small console table near the door. It hit the wood with a heavy, substantial thud. "What is that?" Harper asked. "New passports, passwords to an offshore account with $5 million. The deed to a house in Switzerland, completely untraceable." Vincent recited mechanically, staring at the floor. "Your mother's medical transfer is already arranged. You leave in an hour. Oliver will drive you to the airstrip." Harper stared at the envelope. "You're sending me away." "I am setting you free," Vincent corrected, finally looking up at her. The agony in his eyes was blinding. "You did your job. The engagement served its purpose. The war is won. I bought you your life back, Harper. Take it and run." "And what about you?" I stay here, in the dark." Vincent let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. He looked down at his blood-stained hands. "This is what I am. This is all I will ever be. You looked at me 2 nights ago and called me pathetic. You were right." He turned away from her, intending to walk toward his study, to lock himself away in the cage he had just killed his own blood to secure. "Vincent." He didn't stop. "Vincent, look at me." He paused, his hand resting on the heavy brass doorknob of the study. He didn't turn around. "Leave, Harper, before I change my mind and trap you here forever." Harper walked across the marble floor. She didn't hesitate. She stepped directly into his space, reaching out and grabbing his arm, forcing him to turn and face her. Up close, he smelled of gunpowder copper and rain. He looked down at her, his jaw locked, fighting a desperate losing battle against the proximity. "Carmine called me last night," Harper said quietly. Vincent went utterly still. "What?" "He offered me $2 million to walk out the back gate before you got to him. He told me you were a dead man." Vincent's breathing hitched. "And you didn't take it?" "No. I told him you were coming for him." Harper reached up. She ignored the dirt and the blood. She cupped his face in both of her hands. His skin was freezing cold. "I didn't stay because I was trapped, Vincent. I stayed because I chose to." Vincent squeezed his eyes shut, leaning his weight into her hands. A fractured, ragged breath tore from his chest. "You don't know what you're choosing. I will ruin you." "I was already ruined. I was working myself into an early grave, terrified of every shadow," Harper said fiercely, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. "You pulled me out of the dark. You don't get to push me away now just because you're afraid." He opened his eyes. The terrifying, icy boss was gone. The man staring back at her was entirely undone, laying bare his desperation, his obsession, and his absolute surrender. "You are insane," Vincent whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm pragmatic." Harper threw his own words back at him. She rose slightly on her toes, closing the agonizing distance between them. "And you really are pathetic if you think I'm walking out that door." Vincent let out a sound that was half laugh, half groan. He dropped all pretense. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against his chest, lifting her off her feet. He buried his face in her neck, holding her with a crushing, desperate strength, as if she were the only solid thing left in a world that had burned to the ground. When he finally kissed her, it wasn't a gentle, polite collision. It was a collision of survival. It tasted like ash adrenaline and absolute inevitability. Harper kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands tangling in his dark hair, anchoring him to the earth. He was a monster. He was a killer. He was the king of a rotting empire. But as Harper held the deadliest man in the city, feeling his heart hammer wildly against her own, she knew one thing for certain. He was hers. From a desperate waitress wiping tables to the fierce queen of a mafia empire, Harper proved that sometimes the only way to survive the dark is to hold the hand of the monster who rules it. She didn't just survive Vincent's world, she conquered it by refusing to blink. If you loved this intense, slow-burn mafia romance, do us a huge favor and smash that like button, subscribe to the channel to catch all our dark romance stories.